Hello there, Dragonfire here. Um, this will be my first video in the month of May. My first video on the channel overall came out on April 1st. So this is my first video for May. So welcome to month number 2 of Dragonfire's reviews. Time for another bulletproof review. For I'll be reviewing an entire franchise this time. This will be the third entire franchise I've reviewed. Check out my other reviews for the Terminator franchise and the American Pie franchise. Now I'm reviewing Ghostbusters, so I think that covers a pretty broad spectrum of different kinds of movies. Alright, Ghostbusters. I've got the kind of box set here, 3 DVD set. Now I know, of course, there was the 2016 movie, and I will be including that in my review as I also watched that again just recently. And of course, I had seen these movies before, the first 2 movies, a number of times, and I've watched the third movie, the 2016 Ghostbusters, at least twice, maybe 3 times. And then just now, after reviewing the first 2 movies over again and having seen the 2016 version recently, I just watched Ghostbusters Afterlife for the first time. Alright. So let's kick it off with the first Ghostbusters. First movie in this franchise, of course, is iconic. You have Bill Murray playing a character named Peter. And let's see, I just had it up here. Some list of different characters in movie, but yeah, Bill Murray is Peter and Dan Aykroyd is Ray, and Howard Ramos is Egon, and Ernie Hudson plays what the name of his character, Winston. Now, those are the 4 Ghostbusters. Of course, you also get a few other characters introduced in this first movie. You get Sigourney Weaver as Dana Barrett. Rick Moranis plays a character named Lewis. Ann Potts plays Janine, who is the secretary for the Ghostbusters. And then you have a couple of villains thrown in there. You have a mayor that they're trying to convince to do something, and you have the advisor to the mayor, that's in the second movie. The first movie, you have a guy who works for some sort of agency. I think it's maybe like the Environmental Protection Agency, so the EPA or something like that thinks that they're doing something that's going to hurt the environment, and wants to get the Ghostbusters shut down because they're not up to code on all their regulations or whatever. But anyway, you're introduced to a world where, people are aware of the concept of ghosts, but most people think that ghosts don't exist. And you have a few scientists, Ray, Peter, and Egon, who are kind of scientists. They all have doctorate degrees. They're all doctors, and they study the paranormal, among other things. And they're looking for ghost activity, and then when they realize that New York is being invaded by ghosts for some reason, all of a sudden they need to form a group called the Ghostbusters. So they They do the whole thing of ghost busting and whatnot, and they finally find out what's causing this. It's like this evil entity that's trying to come back into the real world. He's this ancient Sumerian god, and like he wants to return because he was a human who was worshipped as god or whatever, and then he died, and then now he's trying to come back to the real world, whatever. And um, yeah, it's this whole setup where they have to show down with him. Of course, there's some classic iconic scenes in this movie. Um, you have the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man uh, when he attacks New York City. Stay Puft Marshmallows was not actually a brand, it was something that was made up for the movie Ghostbusters. I think that they actually did do some branding after the movie came out, where they actually sold in stores Stay Puft as an actual brand of marshmallows. Um, but um, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was kind of just kind of a variation of like the Pillsbury Doughboy from commercials back in the day. Very long running series of commercials for Pillsbury that featured the Pillsbury Doughboy. Kind of hard to say sometimes. Pillsbury Doughboy. But anyway, Stay Puft Marshall Man is a combination of him and maybe a few other type of um, fictional icon characters that are associated with brands, characters like the Michelin Tire Man from back in the day, and yeah, he kind of reminds me of that character as well. um, but yeah, that's where the idea came from, and so like a ghost reincarnates as the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, a giant version of him, and he walks through the streets like a King Kong or Godzilla or something. This giant monster creature that attacks the Ghostbusters. It's a very iconic scene from the movie, and it's there's a bit of a romantic comedy going on with Sigourney Weaver's character and Bill Murray's character. So Dana and Peter have a little bit of a love story going on. Then you have there's a thing that's sort of hinted at in the film that's not really, it doesn't get very much screen time, but there's a little bit of a hint that the secretary Janine and Egon have kind of something going on with each other. Like maybe they kind of like each other. Especially she likes him. He's a little bit more clueless to the fact that she has feelings for him, I think. He sort of gets it, but he's also always preoccupied with his scientific studies and whatnot. um, so yeah, I mean, basically they come to a place where pretty much people are now accepting that ghosts exist, um, and they're calling the Ghostbusters for help because ghosts are haunting people's house and going into their thing, and so these group of Ghostbusters are going out and trying to solve this problem. Now, Egon, Ray, and Peter are all doctors. They're certified scientists. They all have their doctorate degrees in different areas like physics, metaphysics, or um, chemistry and stuff like that. They have a number of different doctorates, I think, that are explained or referenced somewhere in the movies. Now, Winston comes in. He becomes like the fourth Ghostbuster, and he's just someone who they hire because they need extra help. So yeah, there's this plot about this ancient demon or lowercase god that is trying to come back. The ancient Samaritans worshipped or whatever. He's trying to come back into the real world or whatever, and so that leads to final showdown. Sigourney Weaver and Rick Moranis, who play Sigourney Weaver, who plays Dana Barrett, and Rick Moranis, who plays Lewis, is kind of this uh, dork nerd character in the movie. Um, get possessed by these ancient spirits or whatever, and so Sigourney Weaver becomes the gatekeeper, and um, Lewis becomes the keymaster. And when the gatekeeper and the keymaster are together, then they are able to unleash Zulu, that ancient Samaritan god type entity that comes back and once again has this plan to take over the world, destroys part of New York, and there's a bunch of ghosts flying everywhere, and the ghosts are loose, and the Ghostbusters have to contain the situation, mainly dealing with the Zulu character. We also get to see a ghost by the name of Slimer in this movie, the one they nicknamed Slimer, and he becomes like a bit of a fan favorite, and I think he actually joins like the Ghostbusters in the cartoon series that came out around that time. Ghostbusters became very popular, and so they started doing a cartoon TV series based off the movie, and it became like a popular kids thing, and Slimer was kind of like the mascot of the Ghostbusters. Um, the in the cartoon series, he was the mascot. He makes brief appearances in the first two movies. Uh, I was gonna say, Ghostbusters. There was actually a big legal battle, I guess, that ensued, and there was some stuff going on to get the rights to the name. Someone else actually already owned the rights to the name Ghostbusters. Prior to the movie, when it came out, there was a TV series called Ghostbusters, and um, so it was not what the movie was. The movie is not an adaptation of the TV series, but the little known TV series did already exist, so the name Ghostbusters was already under copyright, but it was a different thing. It wasn't the same as what the movie was. But anyway, they had to get the rights to the name before they could actually make the movie and actually call it Ghostbusters. In fact, they had an alternate title, and the group was going to be called something else if they couldn't get the rights to the name Ghostbusters. So, but they did get the rights to the name, and they were able to make the movie and call it Ghostbusters. Okay, so after the first movie, you get Ghostbusters 2, and you get all the returning cast, like every significant person from the first movie returns, with the exception of the main villain, or the main human villain, not including ghost villains, but the main human villain of the first movie, who was that guy who worked for the EPA or whatever it was. He doesn't return, but he's kind of replaced with this new character who is a advisor to the governor. Apparently, the governor got reelected because, or not the governor, mayor, I should say, mayor of New York City, got reelected because they brought back the same actor to play the mayor again in part 2. So part two starts off stating that it takes place 5 years later. It just comes up on the screen and says 5 years later. So I'm assuming that means 5 years after the first movie. Th- that would make sense. The first movie came out in '84, and part two came out in '89. So we're just assuming it follows real time, and part one is in '84 and part two in '89. So, um, uh, it's it's an interesting plot. It kind of picks up where the old one left off. Um, in well, actually, I take that back. Not, I mean, it's obviously the same characters and returning to the same world that the first movie took place in, but I guess there's been a little bit of a drought in ghost busting for a while, and the Ghostbusters are now not necessarily really that active. There hasn't been a lot of ghost activities, so they're doing things like showing up at children's birthday parties, um, and entertaining kids at kids' birthday parties. It's like, oh, remember those guys, the Ghostbusters, who saved the city 5 years ago? Now they're birthday party clowns or whatever. Entertainers for little kids. Um, but but of course then, um, paranormal activity starts to pick back up again, and you get the new movie, and things are happening again where the Ghostbusters need to become active once again. Uh, so this movie, um, there are some things I really don't like about Ghostbusters 2. It does reassemble basically the entire original cast. Every important character comes back for the sequel, which is nice. But um, it's like with Ghostbusters 2, you lose all the progress that you made in the first movie. Now, keep in mind, this is only 5 years later. And they're still in the same city, the city of New York. You still have the same mayor of the city. And 5 years later, and there were events in the first movie that were witnessed by thousands, at least hundreds, if not thousands of people all at the same time. Witnessed things like the giant marshmallow man walking down the streets of New York, uh, climbing up a big high rise building like King Kong and trying to kill the Ghostbusters, and then the Ghostbusters melting him in giant piles of marshmallow goo splashing all over the street and whatnot. And yet, 5 years later, they encounter people who don't believe that ghosts are real, and people who, I mean, how are they denying that this other stuff happened? Apparently, the Ghostbusters also have been charged with some of the damages that took place during all this. Like why would you charge like to use an analogy, why would you charge the military or law enforcement or anything like that if they came in and stopped a terrorist attack against the city? You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, there was damage to the city, and things got blown up and things got ruined or whatever. You'd blame the terrorist. You'd blame the people who were holding people up in a hostage situation, or doing that. But instead they blame the Ghostbusters. It's like blaming the police who arrested a criminal instead of blaming the criminal who committed the crime. But it's this weird thing where it's like they have to prove themselves all over again. And that's something I really don't like about this movie. It's like enough people witness what happened in the first movie that they really shouldn't have to prove themselves all over again. And um, and so that kind of bugs me. And it also bugs me that that the Dana and Peter, all the progress that they made in the first movie of developing a relationship, it seems like this movie picks up. They dated for a while, then they broke up, and but now Sigourney Weaver is back, or this character of Dana Barrett is back, and so she's back, and now her and Peter are starting to flirt with each other again, and so we relive the entire like courtship process of trying to get those two characters together. We have to go through it again 5 years later, when we just watched, in the previous movie, and I know there was 5 years between the movies, but they could have done that differently. They could have had Peter and Dana in a relationship now, instead of saying that they broke up in between movies, just to do a whole nother movie to try to get them back together again. And apparently in the 5 years between the two movies, Dana she dated Peter, then they broke up, then she dated another man, married that other man, had a baby, divorced him, and her baby is only her baby's probably like less than a year old, or at the most maybe 1 year old. So like they either got divorced while she was pregnant, or divorced right after the baby was born, or whatever. So now she's single again, and now, her and Peter come back into each other's lives, and it's like we're redoing the love story, the kind of the flirting back and forth between the two, and the whole thing leading to them possibly ending up together that we saw in the first movie, and we're just doing it over again. Just like we're doing over again all of the stuff like trying to convince people that ghosts are real. We're just doing that again. It's like in the first movie we had to convince people that ghosts were real, and then hundreds and thousands of people witnessed ghosts and witnessed all this paranormal activity, this weird supernatural stuff going on. But then we got to go back and convince everyone that it's real again. It's kind of ridiculous. In this movie, they do a number of they have a number of times where they say things that sound like one-liners, where you could tell they were trying to get a catchphrase over. I don't know if those catchphrases originated from the cartoon TV series, or if they were just something they were trying to do new in this movie. The series did run. The cartoon series did run from the time the original Ghostbusters came out all the way through to Ghostbusters 2, and then continued running even after Ghostbusters 2 movie came out. So they were quite popular in the children's market for a while, popular enough to keep their cartoon on the air, a children's cartoon. But anyway, it feels like this movie was trying to create catchphrases. They wanted it to catch on. There was a couple, I can't remember what they are now, but after they blast the ghost, they'd say a one-liner. So that was something that this movie was really trying to do, was trying to get, I think, Ghostbusters into the pop culture and make them cool and hip. There's this whole storyline in the movie, in Ghostbusters 2, about this thing where it's like, oh, we want to where there's this goo running under the street, so we want to have good emotions, because bad emotions makes it negatively charged and good emotions make it positively charged. And so there's this whole storyline with this goo. They use the goo to bring the Statue of Liberty to life, and they use the Statue of Liberty to create positive energy, people getting behind that, it being such a symbol of the city of New York. And so they're trying to create this positive energy, and then they're also using the Statue of Liberty to help fight the main ghost monster bad guy of this movie. similar to the first movie. It's this ancient, this guy from the ancient times. This one instead of being from like 1000 BC and from the Samaritan culture, this time it's an ancient um, like evil ruler or king of some European country or something like that. I don't know, from like medieval times or something like that. I think is what he's supposed to be, and he was this evil king or ruler back in the day, and now he's trying to use or he's partially come back through a painting of himself, and then ghosts are possessing different people, and then he's got to steal a baby in order to be reborn and to come back into the world and maybe rule the world again. So another evil spirit trying to take over the world like the first one. Um, and so that's kind of the ghost monster that they have to fight. And you've got the douchebag character. In the first one, it's an EPA agent. In this one, it's an advisor to the mayor of the city. One of his advisors is trying to block access to the mayor and trying to get rid of the Ghostbusters because he doesn't believe in ghosts and he thinks it's all a bunch of nonsense, and he apparently hasn't seen the tons of evidence that would exist from the first movie. I mean, thousands of people witnessed it. I'm sure there were TV cameras, there were videos and photographs taken and all this kind of stuff. I'm sure it was reported on the news at the time. It seems like it would it would be really hard to deny all of this. They should be in a universe where everybody just knows that ghosts exist and they have to deal with it as part of life. Instead, they seem to be in a universe where that has to happen all over again in part two, just 5 years later in the very same city. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But we get a lot of that because now we're going to move on to the third movie. The third movie in the franchise, which is the Ghostbusters remake. And it definitely should be considered a remake. It's not a, I would say, exact retelling of the original movie. It doesn't go beat for beat or follow the same entire structure, at least not from what I can tell. It's a very similar story for sure, so I consider it a remake in that way, and it's definitely set in an alternate universe where the first two movies did not happen. But it is telling its own story. It's the very similar story, but different enough that I would consider it somewhat different. It's not as similar as some remakes that are out there. It's not like the Psycho remake or Nightmare on Elm Street remake or Halloween remake, where basically the same basic story is told. All the major story points are there, just told in a new updated way with new younger actors and all that. You know, it's not like those, but it's close enough to the original that it definitely is a remake, and it takes the same basic concept and it does a few new things with that concept, but basically the idea is there. You have the four Ghostbusters, this time all played by women, and you have them all get together. It's very much that they were going for a replacement of the original. So you've got one character who resembles Egon, another character who resembles Winston, and then you have your Ray and Peter type characters in the movie, and the four of them, the only difference is now they're all women instead of men. They hire secretary. They hire a male secretary instead of a female secretary to help run the office while they're doing their ghost busting. Um, uh, so because this is a movie in which the other movies did not take place, once again we start out in a world where no one believes in ghosts. And so, once again, part of the movie is convincing people that ghosts exist. Now, this is, I mean, obviously, this is a remake where the other movies didn't happen. So, we once again have to um, explain to everybody that ghost does exist or whatever. But we also have to, um, you know, introduce Ghostbusting. We have to once again go to the technology that they use, something I didn't mention about the first movie, but they've been inventing this technology. The technology needs to be invented all over again for Ghostbusting. And um, and basically they've taken the exact same concept and they're pretty much more or less trying to do the same movie. I don't think that the humor is as good. I think it's okay in some places. I don't think it's as good. Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd, of course, are two legendary comedians, and they do well playing off um, uh, Howard Ramos and Ernie Hudson, who play the two more straight characters. You know, they play the two more kind of straight characters a little bit. Of course, both of them have their own sense of humor in their own way. Um, but they're, well, I guess Ernie Hudson would definitely, I think, maybe all four of them were known as somewhat comedians outside of doing this movie, but I feel like especially Bill Murray's character Peter is the one he's more openly the jokester, and Dan Aykroyd's character is one where I think the character himself is not intending to be funny, but of course Dan Aykroyd is a great comedian and can do humor, and part of the reason why the character is funny is because he's not intending to be funny. He just is funny by his personality. Um, the Egon character is obsessed with science, but he is also funny in his own way. And the Winston character, played by Ernie Hudson, has like a sarcastic sense of humor that can come across at times. So, um, so a great original cast of some very funny people. Now, the cast of this movie, it's got some Saturday. When we're talking about the remake, it's got some Saturday Night Live alumni and some people who have been funny in other movies. But it just, in my opinion, like in this movie in Ghostbusters 2016, they're not as funny as the as some of the good humor, especially in the first movie or even in the first two movies, where I think the humor works a little bit better. Um, I feel like this. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the plot. So it's basically the same plot of the first two Ghostbusters movies. Once again, you have this evil entity trying to take over the world. A ghost from the past that wants to come back. I don't remember what the name of the ghost is. It might be Zulu again, but obviously this would be an alternate reality version of Zulu since this film takes place in a different reality. But he possesses their secretary, which is the only real male character in the movie. He possesses the secretary, and um, so they have to fight him. There's a really stupid scene where at the end, towards the end of the movie, with the big showdown between them, and it's the scene where like this ghost guy is trying to take over the world, starting with whatever city they're in. I don't know if it's set in New York City again or not. I don't remember. Um, but he's trying to take over the city and the world and stuff. And in the remake here, and he hypnotizes a bunch of people and makes them do whatever they want. But for some unknown reason, the Ghostbusters themselves are not hypnotized. It's like he's hypnotized this whole group mob of people. Why can't he also hypnotize the Ghostbusters? Like, why are they immune? And it's not a male versus female thing because there are women in the crowd of people who are hypnotized too. So there's no explanation for what's going on in that. And just the whole thing is kind of like, whatever. They definitely end this thing, especially when you consider like the post-credit scenes or scenes that pop up during the credits and after the credits, mid-credit, post-credit, whatever you want to call them, type scenes. They definitely set up for the 2016 Ghostbusters to get a remake, or to get a sequel, to get a sequel. Of course, that never happened. And now we're kind of in the territory where I don't think that ever will happen. But we you have the 2016 Ghostbusters and the female characters. This is something where I think I know there's a lot of debate about the backlash of this movie and the poor reception that this movie got. I don't think it's as good as some of the others, but like I'll give my ranking at the end. But this movie didn't land well for me. It's fine for what it is. I don't hate it. Some people absolutely hate it. Some people say that the only reason other people hate it is because of sexism, because they replace male characters with female characters and stuff. I don't think that that's true. I think that a good movie would have stood up. I know there was some backlash against replacing the male characters with female characters, and I can understand the frustration on the part of many people who just feel like that kind of stuff is being shoved down their throat. It's being crammed down their throat. To me, it doesn't bother me as much, but I get the perspective of saying like all these movies are shoving that kind of stuff down our throat. Like, I think that the movie would have been better. They still could have made the same basic kind of movie, but it would have been better if they would have set it in the same universe as the original two, where the first two movies did happen. They don't have to necessarily convince people that ghosts exist. They can just pick up with like, oh, there's another ghost invasion now that's happening over here, so let's bring in a group of Ghostbusters and try to stop these because we're getting flooded with ghosts again. See, that's what I think they should have done for Ghostbusters 2. I think that's what they should have done in 2016. I mean, these female characters could have been, at least some of them could have been relatives of the original Ghostbusters, or maybe or maybe all the original Ghostbusters had daughters and they're all, the daughters of the original Ghostbusters. Whatever, I don't care. But I think it would have been better if they would have just set it in the same universe instead of trying to reboot it and do a remake. Maybe they could have done something more with it. Like I said, if you watch the end credits, the post-credit stuff, it's clear that they definitely had in mind doing a sequel to that 2016 Ghostbusters, but it appears that that will not happen because of the poor reception to the movie. And I do understand the frustration, although it doesn't bother me as much. I don't care that much about it, but I do understand what the frustration of people basically taking, like, they took the same characters and just gender swapped them, made them female instead of male. Um, and basically saying that the first two movies didn't happen and that we're resetting the Ghostbusters universe. Those are some of the major complaints about this film, and to an extent I agree with those complaints, especially that second one about resetting the Ghostbusters universe. I don't see why that was necessary or why they decided to do that, but um, um, yeah, this movie to me does fall a little bit flat. It's what I've seen before. They're trying to convince everybody that ghosts exist. Now, there's a lot of cameos in this movie from people who were in the first two Ghostbusters films, and but they're playing different characters, obviously, because this is set in an alternate universe. But you get major cameos from Bill Murray, Ernie Hudson, and Sigourney Weaver. Um, I don't know if Dan Aykroyd is in the film or not. He might be. He might be in there somewhere, but I know for sure Bill Murray's in the movie, as is Ernie Hudson, as is Sigourney Weaver. I think Sigourney Weaver only appears in like a post-credit scene or something, but she's in there. Um, and Dan Aykroyd probably does appear in the movie too. I'm probably just forgetting. But anyway, that one, um, this one just ultimately falls flat. I think for most people, and if it would have been a really good movie, I think it would have succeeded. I think I think you can't just use the excuse that they've been using. Well, it didn't succeed because people are sexist, and um, I don't think it's much people are sexist as it is that they don't like the gender swapping of the already established characters. Just take characters that already exist and then gender swap them. And I think a lot of people are kind of sick of that just being over and over again in so many movies. It feels like race swapping, gender swapping is happening a lot, and people feel like that's being crammed down their throat. Um, and people don't like that. But anyway, then let's get to Ghostbusters Afterlife. Now, I mean, for anyone talking about the 2016 Ghostbusters and saying that it was rejected because it was more inclusive, because it, replaced uh, it replaced men with women. Um, this is, I think, an example of how to do more inclusive correctly, because you still have new characters being added to the franchise in Afterlife. You have more female characters present, females becoming Ghostbusters in this movie in Afterlife, and along with these new young kids, and you got some ethnic stuff involved, some different races involved in the movie, just like there was with Winston's character in the first two movies. And now you have some more stuff being done with the kids in this movie. Basically, these four kids, this one, this one, this one, and this one, become like the four new Ghostbusters in this movie. It doesn't make any sense that the Ghostbuster suits that Egon had lying around in his basement actually fit these little kids. That makes absolutely no sense. They're for a full-grown man. And, it is stretching the believability factor to have little kids becoming Ghostbusters a little bit. But this movie pulls it off about as well as you can do. Maybe these actors will come back and they'll do a sequel, being the four new Ghostbusters, and they'll be a little bit older by the time they get back for a sequel movie. But I'd like to see these four reunited again, and be the Ghostbusters, be the new Ghostbusters. You do again. You get cameo appearances from a lot of the um, stars of the uh, original two movies, but this time they're actually playing the characters they were in the first two movies, not playing new characters who are just there for as cameo appearances to get a little bit of fan service and a little nod to the originals. Instead, but playing different characters now. They're playing the same characters they played in the first two movies again. So basically, this one picks up, modern day. I think it's 2021 when the movie came out, and I think that's what year they say it is in the film as well. So it's been decades since the first incident went down, or the incidents that happened in New York back in the 80s, and they reference things happening in New York back in the 80s, especially 1984, and they imply other stuff happened in the 80s as well, which kind of gives a nod to the second movie. It doesn't really reference the second movie directly, it just talks about lots of stuff happening in New York in the 80s. So it's the 80s, not just one single event that happened in 1984, which implies that both movies, Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2, exist in this universe, but that they put more emphasis on that first event, the one that happened in 84, rather than talking a lot about what the Ghostbusters did after that. So they reference the first movie a lot more than the second movie. It seems like. So I think it's still a universe where the second movie still happens. It just recognizes the events of the first movie as being the really important ones. The first movie is the one that got the Ghostbusters together, the reason why the Ghostbusters exist. And so I guess ghost activity has been relatively quiet since the 1980s. And there hasn't been that much ghost activity. But Egon's character is still obsessed with hunting ghosts at the beginning of the movie, but then he dies. And they don't really show his face at the beginning. The actor who played Egon, Howard Ramos, actually died years ago. In fact, he died before the 2016 movie was made. So that's why he wasn't able to cameo in that movie. But oh, by the way, I should mention that Howard Ramos and Dan Aykroyd are the writers of Ghostbusters. I think Dan Aykroyd mostly came up with the original idea, and then he and Howard Ramos, or Dan Aykroyd may have written the original script, and then Howard Ramos revised it and stuff. But anyway, they are listed as co-authors of the original movie. Dan Aykroyd and Howard Ramos. I think it was mostly Dan Aykroyd and Howard Ramos helped him, revise it. So, but anyway, Howard Ramos is no longer with us, but a fantastic actor. Of course, with CGI and ghosts and stuff, they can still kind of make him a character in the movie. But anyway, we start off with his character dying and then we see his daughter and grandchildren move into the house where he lived, and there's a bunch of ghost activity going on there, and that's why he was there and doing that stuff. And so there's another ghost attack that they've got to stop. They've got to stop this new ghost attack. So same as the previous three films, you got a big bad guy coming back. In fact, it's the bad guy over again from the original movie, who's coming back and trying to enter the real world again, or the natural world from the supernatural realm, however you want to phrase it. And so once again, he's got to possess the body of two people to make it, the gatekeeper and the keymaster come together, um, uh, to in order to bring him back into the real world. So we have that going on, and so that gives them a chance to do some busting of ghosts again, some ghost busting. Um, and it's about the two grandkids discovering their parents or their dads, or sorry, their grandfathers, um, life, that he was a Ghostbuster. Apparently, they didn't even really know about the Ghostbusters. Like, the older one had heard the stories about the Ghostbusters, the younger one hadn't even heard the stories. Because it's a pretty localized thing that happened in New York for the most part. But the movie does give indications that ghost stuff has happened elsewhere. But I can kind of get it that most of this stuff was localized to New York back in the 1980s. This, like, the second half of the 1980s, from like 84 to 89 ish. In that time frame is when all this stuff occurred. So I can kind of sort of understand, because there's so many years removed down the road, and it was such a localized event that maybe not everyone believes that it really happened, or but there's all this news footage and all this stuff, so they should be living in a world where there's a lot of very, very strong evidence that ghosts are real and that ghosts do exist. But it's so far removed years later that it makes at least a little bit more sense why everyone doesn't, in this world, everyone doesn't believe in ghosts. Um, but I do think that some of the dialogue in this movie is not that great, for Ghostbusters Afterlife. I wanted to mention one more thing about Ghostbusters 2016 before I forget. I meant to mention this earlier. I kind of forgot when I was talking about 2016. But I'm going to just go ahead and throw this in there. There's a scene in part 2 where um, um, there's a talk show on TV. Peter is the host of the talk show at the beginning of the movie, because he's kind of quit being a Ghostbuster before they bring him back and have him be a Ghostbuster again in part 2. And there's a scene where a woman predicts the end of the world. She predicts it'll happen in 2016. And so it's just kind of funny that she predicted the end of the world would happen in 2016, and they actually did make a Ghostbusters in 2016. So I don't know if they had Ghostbusters 2 in mind when they made that movie, but whatever. Anyway, did it just, was the timing of Ghostbusters 2016 coincidental, or was that done on purpose? But anyway, now we come to Ghostbusters Afterlife. I've been talking about this movie for a little while too. There is a little bit of a believability factor that's missing from this movie. When you see the kids doing all these things, it's kind of like these kids who are, I think the youngest is probably like 8 years old, and the oldest is around 17. And yeah, so this little boy here is supposed to be, I think, like 8 or 9, something like that. Maybe 10 at the most. I don't know. He seems younger than this 12-year-old girl here. But he goes to the same, well, it's a summer school class, and that's how they meet. They meet in summer school, because she's a nerd and she likes to learn things, so she'd rather go to school than just have summer vacation or whatever. And his parents have him in summer school, I guess, for whatever reason. We never see his parents in the movie, so whatever. But anyway, so the two of them meet up in summer school class. This is their summer school teacher, played by Paul Rudd here. And then she is, of course, the granddaughter of Egon. And then you have his grandson. And this is the love interest for the grandson. And he's trying to win her over. See, this is the correct way to make a multiracial cast. You have some Yeah, multi different races represented in the cast of the movie, um, and it introducing new characters without feeling forced or without feeling like you're replacing other original characters that have already been established and just um, gender swapping them or race swapping them. Instead, you're doing it in a way that feels more natural. So I think this is the Afterlife is a much better follow up to the original two rather than rebooting the franchise like they tried to do in 2016. And notice like the four new Ghostbusters basically end up being two guys and two girls. But anyway, um, uh, you get it's kind of like passing on to a new generation now, and I hope they make a sequel to Afterlife. I really do. I'd like to see these four come together again, and um, they'll be a few years older now, and I'd like to see them continue their adventures as Ghostbusters. Um, oh, and I guess in this movie, um, it's implied that that Peter and Dana, or Bill Murray and Sigourney Weaver's characters who do show up and make cameos. Sigourney Weaver's cameo is saved for a post-credit scene, but it is implied that they're married now. So um, that's cool that they actually end up getting together. Um, but yeah, you have the original Ghostbusters show up to help them fight, or what's left of the original Ghostbusters, the three who are left, show up to help them fight um, the ghost that the new Ghostbusters and the original Ghostbusters team up, and we get an appearance by the ghost of um, Egon. Egon, the Egon character, his ghost shows up. They kind of work him in with CGI, and he's supposed to be an old man. He's aged because he died in old age, just like uh, you know, obviously Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Ernie Hudson, all those actors and the characters they play are a lot older now than they were back in the original. But but you know, the ghost of Egon shows up to help save the day, um, so that they can vanish all the bad ghosts who are coming out and the bad spirits and everything. So anyway, yeah, it's an enjoyable movie, and I feel like it's a much better follow up to the original than was Ghostbusters 2 in a much better way. If this is the final one to end the franchise, if they never make a sequel to Afterlife, it's a better send off than Ghostbusters 2 would have been. It's a better way to end the franchise if it is the last Ghostbusters movie ever made. It'll be a better way to end the franchise than what they did in 2016 with the reboot. So, alright, here's going to be my ranking. Now, I don't have a copy of the 2016 Ghostbusters, a physical copy, but I have seen the movie more than once. Alright, so I'll give you my ranking. In fourth place, I'm going to have to put the 2016 remake. It just retreads too much ground from the original. It's not necessary to exist. They definitely went in the wrong direction. There's a scene in that movie where Bill Murray plays, Bill Murray in that movie has a cameo who played Peter in the original. He comes back and has a cameo in that movie playing a different character in this alternate universe, and there's a scene where he dies. And that to me is what I feel like the whole movie was doing. It was killing the legacy of the original too, and especially the first one. So I'm gonna have to give my fourth place to the 2016 remake, and I'm gonna give my third place to Ghostbusters 2. This movie tries, but it does way too much of retreading of the original. Um, to an extent, Afterlife does that as well, where they're also in a universe where not everyone is aware that ghosts exist. But Afterlife has a better excuse and is just done better overall, and the movie is a better movie overall. It doesn't necessarily have all the humor that Ghostbusters 2 have, but they were going for a more serious tone with Afterlife. And Ghostbusters 2 is, they're trying to go for a comedy, but I don't think it's as funny or works as well as the first one. So as a comedy, it kind of fails. It's not as good as the first one, and as a drama or a story to follow the actual story of what's going on in and of itself, it also doesn't do as good as either the first one or Afterlife. So Ghostbusters 2 has to be in third place. In second place, I'll do Afterlife. Like I said, I think this is a fitting conclusion to the story. It makes a good trilogy. You know, ignoring the remake, these three movies are an okay trilogy. Are they perfect? No, there's definitely some mistakes in there where there could have been better tellings of a follow-up story to the original. They could have done it better with follow-ups to the original than what we got. But Afterlife is not that bad. It does much better job as with concluding it, bringing full circle things that were in the original than the sequel did. Definitely much better than the remake. So Afterlife is going to get my silver medal. It's going to be number 2. And I'll give my gold medal to the original. Now, if you watch my Terminator review, you know that Terminator franchise review, and I rank the Terminator franchise, I rank the American Pie franchise, and I'll just tell you that I do not always rank the first one at number 1. But there's a reason why a lot of people do rank the first movie in every franchise as number 1, because it's usually always the most original. It's the one that comes up with the original story, and then the other movies try to recreate that or continue in some way that original story, or recreate it, or whatever they might try to do with that original story. And I think that's a big part of the reason why the first movie in a franchise usually ends up getting ranked number 1. But I don't always rank movies number 1. If you watch my review, I don't always rank the first one number 1. But in the case of Ghostbusters, I am going to rank the first movie number 1. It's the movie I think the comedy works the best. You can follow the story. It's the original story, which the other movies just kind of copy. And how can you pass up, the great... I mean, all these actors and actresses in that first movie, to the character that plays the secretary, even I forget her name, but she is fantastic. And you have Sigourney Weaver as Dana Barrett, you have Rick Moranis as the Lewis character, and then you have the 4 Ghostbusters themselves, of course, Dan Aykroyd, Ernie Hudson, Bill Murray, and Howard Ramos. So it's a great, fantastic lineup, and a really fun cast of characters that I really enjoy. So it's gonna have to get my number 1. So kudos to Ghostbusters, the original, but I do think that the Afterlife is a movie worth worth watching. You don't even really have to watch the second one if you don't want to. You can if you want to. You can skip it. You can just do it as 1-2 punch with Ghostbusters and Afterlife. And Afterlife is a nice follow up to the original. But if if you want to see more of those great actors, you can get a little bit more in part 2. But I would be prepared to be disappointed by some of the story directions they choose to go in. All right. Thank you for joining me for over an hour. Like, share, and subscribe if you like this video. And God bless everybody. Dragonfire out.